silence.
So we're starting for the grabbing, or we're waiting?
She has to connect our meeting to the YouTube channel, so.
Okay.
Yeah, we are live. So, good afternoon. I would like to welcome, first of all, the participants in this seminar called Understanding the Far Right in Brazil and Germany, from National Contexts to Comparative Insights. And we'll have today 4 presenters. First, Professor Wolfgang Muno from the University of Rostock in Germany, who's the leader of the German team of Probral, and also Professor Lina Zanka, who's also at the University of Rostock. And then we have also 2 presenters actually discussing the Brazilian case of extreme right. And this is Professor Silvana Krause, or Krause, if I say it with an American accent, from the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, and myself, João Félix Jr. Both of us are professors of political science. Actually, all of us actually are political scientists. And I am at the State University of Rio de Janeiro, IESP, Instituto de Estudos Sociais e Políticos. So the idea is to have short presentations followed by discussion. So first of all, I forgot to mention that the seminar is part of the Probral project, which is a joint project sponsored by CAPES and DAAD on the extreme right and its impact on the Brazilian and the German political systems. So without more ado, I would like to invite Professor Muno to start his presentation. Thanks.
Thank you. Do you still see my slides?
Oh yeah, clearly.
Yeah, okay, very good. So thank you very much for this opportunity and for this invitation. And I'm very happy that we have another event in our joint project. And I'm looking forward to next year and more events. I will give a short overview of the rise of the far right in Germany, trends and challenges. This has to be seen in the context of a rise of right-wing populists and the far right in Europe in recent decades. Here in this slide, which is in German, however, you can see this is the vote share of populist parties, right-wing populist parties, and this is the participation in government. So we see a clear trend in recent years in many countries in Europe. Right-wing populist parties, we will see here, received a significant share of votes. Here, this is Hungary, where Fidesz from Viktor Orban even had an absolute majority for some in several elections. In Poland, for some time, the PiS had a very high proportion, and this is going down to Denmark, where currently the right-wing populist parties, which are part of the far right, in our view, received in the last elections only a minor share of votes. However, the Progress Party in Denmark even was once part of the government, or at least supportive of a government. In this map, we see that in several countries, like in Hungary, in Italy, also until recently in the Netherlands, they were governing parties, strongest parties even. In other countries, like in Poland, until the last elections, now they are in the opposition parties, but still have the president. And until the last elections in Poland, the Peace Party was governing. In Austria, until the last elections, the Freedom Party was part of the government. In Belgium also, in almost all Scandinavian countries, Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, the far right-wing populist parties were part of the government for some time. Also in France, if there would be elections in France soon, the Rassemblement National would certainly be the strongest party, and maybe even with chances for the presidency in France. So we see the rise of the parties everywhere, also in Germany, where we have the Alternative for Germany, the AfD, which is officially part of the far-right or right-wing extremist party. We have a federal agency for protection of the Constitution, which is observing extremist and anti-constitutional parties, groups, and events, let's say, observing these and giving reports, more or less public reports, sometimes public, sometimes non-public. In May this year, the Federal Agency for Protection of the Constitution, there are also regional agencies or state-level agencies doing the same, and the state-level agencies for several years, they denounce or they called the AfD right-wing extremist, and now the federal agency did this in May this year too, based on an analysis of programs, of statements of politicians, of interviews, of books, of publications, and several other documents, most of them publicly available. And the basic argument was that they are having an ethnic concept of nationality, demanding what they call remigration of the non-German people living here in Germany. Sometimes some politicians of the AfD say only the criminal immigrants should be deported. Others say all immigrants of non-German blood should be deported, and still even more extremist. This is rather right-wing extremist already, and even more extremist politicians demand that not only the immigrants of non-German blood, but also left-wing groups and Antifa and all these people should also be deported wherever this should be, which reminds us of the history of Germany, let's say. So what is interesting for the AfD, that on the supply side, the party started as a Eurosceptical, neoliberal party founded by a lot of economic professors, and it radicalized in recent years more and more until we now call it right-wing extremist. It's also making statements against the liberal democracy and other aspects of democracy, which claim, so the claim right-wing extremism is correct in my side. On the demand side, what is interesting, as we just see in other parties, we see a rising share of votes in recent years. So what is interesting is that Scheuch and Klingemann, two famous political scientists in the 60s in Germany, they spoke of normal pathology in terms of right-wing extremism in Western Europe, claiming that in every Western European state there is a small group of right-wing extremists. This is normal. They are pathological in terms of democracy, but this is normal, a small group between 5 and 10%. And Kars Müller, the famous researcher on right-wing populism, a few years ago claimed that what we see now is a pathological normalization, which means that with the rising acceptance by voters and vote shares between this starts to become normal. This is the vote share of AfD in nationwide electoral results since the foundation in 2013, and we clearly see the tendency. We also see regional aspects, which I made here in the collection of the data, that the ratio between West and East Germany, we clearly see that the party is far more successful in East Germany than in West Germany. It's far more successful in rural areas than in urban areas. It's far more successful, what we all know, amongst male voters, and especially with a limited education, a middle education, and also middle-aged voters. These are the typical voters of the AfD. Independent craftsmen and working class is now the dominant voter of the AfD in Germany. In some regions, and this is our region where University of Rostock is based, in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, they even, as I said, they are more better. In the last federal election here in this region, in this state, the party received 35% percentage points. And we see also a clearly rising share of votes. These are the latest surveys for the Alternative for Germany from December. Or some of them are oldest, but the latest are made just days ago. And here we see that in surveys, on average, they're now on the federal level, they would receive 25% of the votes. The average in the states is 21%, but we see a clear difference. We see it also in the West German states. They are far less successful than in East German states. What is interesting, and that's the challenge for next year, is that we have 4 federal state elections, not federal, but 4 state elections. You can see it here in the southwest of Germany, where they are in surveys around 20%, and in Berlin, where they are not very successful so far, in survey 16%, and in Saxony-Anhalt and in Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania, our region. And there are, as you see, in Saxony-Anhalt, in surveys they receive even 40%, which would make them clearly the strongest party in the state parliament. Same in Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania. The elections will be in March in West Germany, and in June and September in the eastern part. And we will see how this will change. And the AfD has chances to even be a governing party in Germany, which would be the first time since the Second World War that a far-right party would govern, even perhaps alone, depending on the outcomes. So how do we react? And this is the second debate. The first debate is what would happen if the AfD would govern on the state level. We don't know exactly. States have some competences, and that would be an interesting experiment bet for many people if they would govern. The second debate we have is, should we do a party ban? Because the German constitution allows Germany to ban parties. Here I have quoted Article 21 of our constitution, saying parties which, according to their objectives or the behavior of their supporters, aim to impair or eliminate the free democratic basic order or to endanger the existence of the Federal Republic of Germany are unconstitutional. So, and this would mean banning party successor organizations, a loss of mandates, and also a loss of party assets, money, everything would be confiscated. How does this work? One of the federal organizations, the parliament or the federal council or the federal government, would have to apply for party prohibition, and then the Constitutional Court of Germany would decide. And the Constitutional Court did this already several times. The first ban was in 1952. Basically, this is the slide which is important. The first ban is in 1952. A far-right extremist Nazi party, which has been founded by former Nazis, was banned. In 1956, the Communist Party of Germany has been banned. And twice bans have been proceeded against the Nazi party, a neo-Nazi party, NPD. And this failed twice. The first for formal legal reasons, and the second because the NPD was declared by the Constitutional Court as extremist, but the Constitutional Court said it's not relevant enough. In elections, it received less than 1%. So there is no need to ban this party because this is a real heavy instrument. The criteria for banning is the party must be anti-constitutional. The party members or the voters have to actively and militantly work against the constitutional order. It must be the entire party, not just individual politicians or parts of the party. and the party must be relevant. This is clearly something we now see in terms of the AfD. However, it's not automatically the banning, but there must be the application and then the court proceedings. And there's a lot of debate now in Germany whether we should do that or not. A party receiving in some regions, in some states, almost 40% of votes, banning this, although it's clearly unconstitutional by many arguments. This is, of course, very problematic. So this is part of the debate, how to democracy in Germany more resilient against the rise of right wing, of the far right, which has been also debated in other European countries. Other European countries do not have the possibility of banning parties legally, but there's a lot of debate about reforms in order to increase the performance, a better communication, control maybe social media, improve representation, improve participation, and also rebuild civil society somehow in order to fight against the rise of the far right. These are the trends, debates, and challenges we have in Germany at the moment, and also in several other European states. Muito obrigado. Thank you for your attention. I don't know if the time is, well, almost good.
Oh, yeah, definitely is. Thanks a bunch, Wolfgang. I would like to invite Lena to, it's Lena or Lena?
Lena, but...
Lena, okay.
Yeah. So I didn't work with Google Meets before, so I'm gonna just see.
There's a button there, share screen.
Mm-hmm.
It just
choose the image.
And then you choose the screen you want to share.
Okay.
More or less, yeah.
You can also click on the presenting mode on, yeah.
Yes, that's good.
Is it,
perfect.
You can hear me and the presentation is all good.
Sehr gut.
Great. Okay. So, yeah, first of all, I'm Lena. I'm very thankful that Wolfgang put me on this call and asked me to do a little presentation on the topic of the far right and women in Germany. I'm at the moment pursuing my doctorate under Professor Mono, and I'm focusing on feminist political science and gender relations. And yeah, so because it's a very you can really dive deep into this topic. I'm gonna try to keep it as short and interesting as possible. And I'm gonna speak about the gender ideology and the female leadership in the AfD. And I'm very grateful that Wolfgang did such a great introduction already, because many slides are just basic facts about the AfD, and he covered that already, so I'm able to skip them. So just what I'm going to talk about, just very shortly, what the AfD is about, and how many members in parliament there are of the AfD. I'm going to cover that in a minute, and I'm going to then jump to their gender ideology with their two key points, anti-feminism and anti-genderism. And then I'm going to talk about the role that the AfD played in terms of the modern voting gender gap, which we've seen emerge in the last years in Europe. And at the end, I'm gonna say something about the paradox of the female leadership in the AfD. So I'm just gonna talk briefly about this because Wolfgang already said some introduction points about the AfD and when it was founded and what was initially their program. which is a very Eurosceptic, but neoliberal, and you could say socially conservative party. And what we've seen since 2013 is a rapid shift in their political program. So they are now right-wing populist or far-right party. The gender topic has always been always played a role in the program, and a very traditionalist view on gender roles, but in combination with more anti-immigration and ethnologist positions, it became this from neoliberal to far right. Wolfgang also said they are stronger in Eastern Germany than in Western Germany. This alone could be is a research topic on its own, because the former GDR, the German Democratic Republic, was known for their you could say progressive view on women and emancipation. Of course, it was economically needed, so they needed the women in the labor market, and so there were very many women working at least part-time. They had a very good infrastructure in childcare, etc. So it's very interesting that what you can see on the in the eastern part of Germany, which is blue, similar to the AfD. So the results in the federal election earlier this year, which are the former Bundesländer, so the states of Germany that had a very progressive view on women and emancipation, but now seem to re-traditionalize and go back to very old views on gender. But that's not, you could go into great detail on that topic alone, and there is very interesting research on this. But I just put this map right here so you could just understand and put in perspective the political success of the party. And as Wolfgang has already covered, it is by Federal Agency for the Protection of the Constitution confirmed right-wing extremist, and it's also by many scholars described as a key player in the right-wing extremist spectrum. What I've brought here on this slide is a seat distribution on the current German Bundestag, so the current parliament. The blue group over here on the left side is are the AfD members in parliament, and the bigger group, the majority of seats belong to the Christian Democrats, the Greens, the Green bloc over here are the Greens, and then the red, the Social Democrats, and the pink wing over here are the lefts. So what you can see is that although that the AfD is the second largest group in our parliament, but interestingly enough, they are not part of our government. The majority of all other parties in our parliament, in our Bundestag, kind of have a no cooperation stance. So they won't work with them, they won't go into debates with them, other than the ones that are in the parliament on a regular basis, but they don't want to be in a coalition with them. So because I'm talking about gender, it's very interesting to not only see the overall share of seats of the AfD, but also focus on the gender representation. And what stands out is that although the AfD is the second largest group in our Bundestag, it has what you can see right here, the blue bloc again is the AfD. It has, although it's the second largest group, it only has 18 female members in parliament. This kind of reinforces the image of a very male-dominated party, and we can see this pattern of a small percentage of women and not many members in this party, not only on a federal level but also on a state level in other Bundesländer and states. And what I want to talk briefly about before I'm going to specifically talk about AfD and gender and the key role players in that party is why does gender even matter to discuss, to talk about in terms of the far right. So I'm going to refer to Niels Bierings, who I thought put it in great perspective, because he said gender is trivial. So it's a combination of gender being very simple, very banal, you could almost say. So a very simple idea of there's man and woman, there's only two sexes, and there's a natural order to it. On the one hand, so everyone else, the corrupt elite, they're making it more complicated than it needs to be with diversity programs, etc. And on the other hand, it's very important, and it's a central key element to their whole program, to their whole ideology, because it connects core elements. So it connects the aspect of nativism, authoritarianism, and populism, which are elements you find in far-right parties, not only in Germany, but in general. But gender plays a huge role in all three of these aspects. So in terms of nativism, we see the demand of protecting the native family, so the ethnic German families. We see a hierarchical gender order, so very almost with biology explained rule of man rule over women, man rule over all, and populism as an aspect of the ordinary families. Wir sind das Volk, die normale Familie. That's the slogans and many campaigns in Germany versus the liberal elites, the corrupt elites, which made every mistake you could do in the past couple of decades, and they criticized that. So what are the key concepts in the gender ideology of the AfD? So we have anti-feminism, which refers to the opposition to gender equality and feminism. And one step further, you have the anti-genderism, which kind of attacks the very idea of gender as being different to the sex. So what has happened through feminist approach in the last decades is that we've seen a very consensus that which you can also see in EU programs such as gender mainstreaming, etc. That we differentiate between sex, so the sex you're born with, and the gender, so the social construct which you identify with. And anti-genderism and the AfD specifically, they attack that very idea. So there's nothing else than your biological sex. You're either a man or a woman, and you live in a heteronormative world. So there are predominantly heterosexual couples with children as the norm, and children especially are the so-called core of society. So mother, the father, mother, and the child are the only legitimate family model they support and they find legitimate. It also, as I said, it romanticizes this binary, so-called natural gender order, and it rejects women's and also queer emancipation in gender politics, and these are all little dots you can connect to a bigger picture, a bigger political project, which is to restore a very male and heteronormative dominated society, and family and gender and this kind of feeling of natural orders of the world are essentially projection surfaces to different human longings, security, home, etc. So you could see this in there, which I've put here in their manifesto for the federal election time for Germany. But you could have seen that really since 2013, the standpoints of on a federal level and state level are not that much. There's not much differences there. They're almost the same. Sometimes you find, for example, in Saxony, because this is a more extremist, even more radical views on that. So historically, what's interesting is I've put this to showcase that the evolution of the voting gender gap. Here, what's interesting is that women were more conservative in Germany till the 80s. So they were predominantly religious, more religious than men, and so they would often vote more conservative. But what we've seen in the 80s and the 90s is that you can see this in gray right here, that the dissimilarities between sexes and voting behavior kind of decreases, and then we're gonna skip to they are even at zero at some point. So we can not longer identify any major dissimilarities between the sexes. But when we skip to the 2010s, then this pattern kind of is going reverse. So when women voted more conservative, which is the orange right here, they are developing a far more left-leaning voting behavior now. So since 2013, we can see in Germany that not only has the dissimilarity in voting behavior between men and women significantly reached a new peak, but we can also see that women have significantly voted more left than men have. There are many explanations and theories trying to see where all this comes from. So there are economical reasons, there are cultural reasons, but overall it's a combination of a cultural backlash, you could say, and the so-called consequences that emerged from the globalization and modernization. So these are the most referred to theories. What I'm going to show right now is or what I'm going to focus right now is the paradox of the female leadership in the AfD. So I've already said that AfD has a low proportion of women. There are not many women in the electorate, so the women voters are just very few. It's a very male, very popular among male voters. There are not many women as members in the AfD, and as I've already also showed, there are not many female members in parliament of the AfD. So it's a very male-dominated party organization and culture. But at the same time, we have Alice Weidel as the chairwoman of the AfD parliamentary group in the Bundestag, and also the federal spokesperson of the Alternative for Germany. So on top of, so building the top of the party. And what's interesting is not only that she's a woman representing a party that is so anti-feminist, but she's also a lesbian, living in a lesbian partnership with a woman born in Sri Lanka, and they are raising 2 children together in Switzerland, mainly. So a very paradox kind of personal decision when in terms of the AfD and who their leadership represents, and what many of us kind of think from the jump is, when speaking about paradox, we think in linear terms. So there's either you're either pro-change, so you're more modern, you want gender relations to change, or more traditional and are pro-persistence of these gender relations. What Andrea Mayhofer and Anke Engel propose is a more circular political figure of the paradox, so that this tension between change and persistence is not a problem per se. It's more a strategic resource. So you have you have a party with a very conservative and anti-feminist gender program, which showcases a female leader. And they approach this by saying it's not either this or this, it's a permanent alternating between the options, and always depending on the setting and the situation and what can benefit the party. Those the circular function, the circular figure can be, I think in my mind, be very abstract, but Maya had proposed strategic functions of female leaders, which you can very easily transfer to this circular political idea of the paradox. I'm not gonna go into detail on every single function because there are time limits, but to make it a bit less abstract, when we look at, for example, at the strategic resource from females as softeners and mediators, this essentially means that they are benefiting from very stereotypical views of women being the ones that are more empathetic, the ones that care more, are more moderate in their views. So they put female leaders on purpose in those positions because their statements, although they say the exact same thing as male colleagues, it seems less harsh, it seems less aggressive. So they are playing with, on this side, on the persistence of gender relations. On the other side, When we look at these women in female leaderships, they are of course role models and identification points for young women especially, and they kind of are the proof for the party that they are not anti-feminist, and they are very modern because look here, we have a female leader who's a lesbian, and right there they are kind of on the side of change of gender relations, a more progressive view on it. They're working mothers who can do it all. So you can see that depending on the benefit they're hoping for, depending on the setting, they are alternating between the option persistence and change. Yeah. And not only Alice Weidel is an example of that, but we see this in Italy with Giorgia Meloni. We see this in France with Marine Le Pen. All women who are not exactly representing this idea of the perfect woman and the stay-at-home mom and the very traditional view on gender roles. They're living separate from their partners, they're raising their children alone, etc. So it's you could go on and on and on this topic, but I'm going to cut it short right here. Because I'm just gonna, for this discussion, I'm gonna reduce it to these 3 key points. So the AfD promotes an anti-feminist and heteronormative gender order. Gender is central to its nativist and authoritarian political project, and female leaders in general, but especially in the AfD, have made this agenda acceptable and also very appealing. Yes, so that was my part. Thank you very much.
Thanks a bunch, Lena. I would like to invite Silvana to start her presentation. Do you want me to pass the slides for you, Silvana? Okay, so let me do it. Just a second. Okie dokie. Over here. Silvana, you're muted. We don't get no sound from you.
So, and now?
Yes, now we can hear you clearly.
So, it's a pleasure to be part of the Probral Brazil Germany program project, the far right in Comparative Perspective Brazil Germany. The speed of change in the dynamics of political actors and institutions has perhaps been the most obvious characteristics of Brazilian democracy. It has been a common symptom in several democracies. Actors and contexts are embedded in institutional frameworks. So, actors interact and react in changing environments. I am inspired by Louisiana State University professor Leon Megginson interpretation of Darwin's work in 1963. It is not the strongest that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one the best adapts to change. I am also inspired by an expression to analyze the prospects of the extreme right, which in Brazil has hegemonized Bolsonarism since 2018. There is no power that will ever leave you. What explains? So the next slide, please. What explains the victory of the extreme right in the 2018? This question already has some consolidated answers in Brazilian political science. What are the main factors behind his defeat in 2022? It is important to remember that Bolsonaro was the first president in the new democracy who was not re-elected. Finally, the question that won't go away. What are the extreme right's prospects for next year's election? Does the Brazilian far right have the capacity to adapt? I will just point out some arguments that in the current context, it hasn't demonstrated this virtue of adaptation. So first, I am going to present some variables of the reasons for the rise of the far right in Brazil in 2018. Secondly, I will point out its limits in the context of the pandemic and after Lula's election in 2022. In the third moment, I will bring up elements of the current scenario that indicate difficulties for the Bolsonaro's far right to become president. So, you can put the second, please. So, Bolsonarism won the presidency of Brazil predominantly due to a contest favorable to its candidacy. In the institutional dimension, it is important to highlight the decline in representation and the void left by the main traditional right-wing and center parties in the Chamber of Deputies. The movement began in 2002 when Lula was elected and reached its peak in 2018 when Bolsonaro won. As the second, please, another. At the same time, it's important to consider that Lula's party had been in sharp decline since 2014, and in the last 2022 election, it recovered. This data shows that a window of opportunity was open in 2018 for the victory of the far right. The partisan scenario in the election of the far right also need to be understood in a context of growing movements of discontent with politics since 2013, with the June protests, the impeachment of President Dilma in 2016, the anti-corruption movement and anti-petism. In addition to institutional issues and movements, an economic crisis with recession, unemployment, and rising inflation also impacted on the positive result for the far right. These factors are not enough. Bolsonaro's victory was also the result of the far right effective strategy. The leader effectively presented himself as a symbol of anti-politics, anti-partisanship, and anti-partyism. It also revived the values of an extreme right with roots in the 30s. Jean, you can put another, please. The another side, please. So, thank you. It also revived the values of an extreme right with roots in the 30s. Brazil above all, good above all. Anti-petism come in the take. Please, the next, please, the next slides. So, only to come and take part in the PT's funeral. Anti-petism for the for the good of Brazil, good patriotism and family. So you can see the same. João, pouquinho anterior às fotos. Isso, só. Stay here. So, it's important to remember that Lula was in prison, a favorable context for the far right. So, yes, the next. The far right in 2022, unfavorable fortune and scarce virtue. The 22 election showed the strength of the extreme right's candidacy as it almost won. The difference was just 1.8% for the winning candidate Lula. With regard to the defeat of the far right, there are already polls showing the context of the pandemic and Bolsonaro's misguided strategy for dealing with the crisis. Bolsonaro has made statements that have had an impact on the candidates' rejections. So, please. Gipzinha, anterior, por favor. So, a rejection rate of 52% days before the elections. Emblematic statements such as, Gipzinha won't bring me down. I'm not a grave digger, as well as jokes about the dance that went viral on social media. The president's administration delayed vaccination in the country and Bolsonaro campaign against the vaccine. The strategy of legitimizing the election, attacking Supreme Court justice and the superior electoral court also legitimized President Bolsonaro. Legitimized President Bolsonaro, excuse me. Bolsonaro's strategy has had a negative impact on his campaign with important regional leaders from the right and center of the country. Regional leaders are fundamental to a national election. Some governors declared themselves neutral in the second round. Others did not declare their support. So, can you see the next, please, John? The rejection, of Bolsonaro. Okay. And the next. So you can go. So yes, that's okay. Stay here. The far right in 2026, the Bolsonaro family and the succession. So first of all, it is very important to differentiate between a far right route in Brazil and a traditional oligarchic right with basis in the state units, showing the traditional right-wing graph. The traditional right-wing. It's the next graphic, please. No, anterior, excuse me. Another. Well, so, próximo, peraí. Cadê o gráfico da... Wait a moment, please. What is the graphic about? No. So, the representation of traditional right parties in the Chamber of Deputies. This is interesting to see. The right wing recovered in 2022 election and has a combined representation of 21% in the Chamber of Deputies. Last week, they registered with the Supreme Court. To build a party federation, the Progressive Union. With this federation, the traditional right has the largest representation in the Chamber of Deputies. It also has the largest share of campaign funding and television advertising time. This federation is a revival of the old arena from the period of the military-civil regime. However, it does not have a high-profile candidate with national capillarity and cohesion. Its strength lies in the regional oligarchies, which is expressed in his representation in the legislature. Its ability to adapt in presidential contests is impressive. It has the flexibility to have party presidents in opposition to the Lula government, but with some of its leaders holding positions in government ministries. This flexibility is also seen in regional party leaders. For the far right, the traditional right, and the center will be fundamental in the next year's election. The current scenario for the far right is one of difficulty in leading a cohesive candidacy with these blocs. The far right has shown little ability. Bolsonaro's arrest has had an impact. His leadership, the next, John, the next, please. His leadership, his leadership has lost support. 55% think his arrest is fair, according to recent poll. And his rejection, as I said, is very, very high. The most recent Ipsos-IPEC poll indicates an 18 to 23% transfer of votes to a candidacy that Bolsonaro would support. Bolsonaro's son's pressure in the US for higher tariffs on Brazilian products has not had the expected effect. Próximo, pode botar. Last week, the Trump administration withdrew the Magnitsky Act, which sanctioned Supreme Court Justice Alexander de Moraes and his wife. On social media, this was the subject of much ridicule and mockery. The image of the far right as nationalist and patriotic was discredited by pressure from Eduardo Bolsonaro. Please, the next, please, John. Amnesty now, impeach Moraes, done with the toga dictatorship. Let's fill the nation's streets with green and yellow, and with the flags of Brazil, the United States, and Israel. So, the extreme right has the great challenge of resolving many internal differences. The disagreements over the candidates of the extreme right are between the family, in the party, among President Bolsonaro's allies, and with regional leaders of the traditional right. Pode botar adiante, por favor. That you can see. Although Bolsonaro has launched his son, Senator Flávio, as a candidate for the presidency, the former president's wife has shown interest and disputes with her children. Flávio says Michele ran over Bolsonaro and was authoritarian. So, you can see. The choice of Flávio Bolsonaro as Bolsonaro's candidate has generated a crisis on the right, which has a preference for the governor of São Paulo. Right? You can put the next, so you can see the governor at the, excuse me, anterior, João. So. Flávio Bolsonaro avança como candidato, and so leaders on the right and also in the center don't want Bolsonaro family members interfering in deals that could guarantee state parties for the 2026. Eduardo Bolsonaro has attacked important Bolsonarist allies, such as the governor of São Paulo, Brazil's main electoral district. Tarcísio is the system candidate. You can see the next, próximo, João. So, Tarcísio is the systems candidate, the governor from São Paulo. No? Important, so he was a minister of Bolsonaro. Important source of instability in Bolsonarism are the right-wing governors. Carlos Bolsonaro, a counselor from Rio de Janeiro, calls governors rats. The governor of Mato Grosso, faced with the US tax crisis, calls Eduardo Bolsonaro crazy and out of touch with reality. You can see the next, please. Yeah, you can see. The traditional right and the centrist center are evaluating how to position themselves. So far, it doesn't have a sufficiently competitive candidacy for the presidency without the votes of the extreme right. They will probably present candidates for the first round and will negotiate support for one of the candidates in the second round. I pointed out some variables that indicate the lack of Bolsonaro family's virtue. As the main representative of the Brazilian far right, they are not demonstrating the capacity for articulation, cohesion, and negotiation when it comes to building a candidate. The positive context of the Lula government has also not made it easy for the Bolsonaro far right. The economic recovery, such as the fall in unemployment, an increase in the average real income of Brazilians, controlled inflation, and growth in the gross domestic product. Another variable is the difficulty for an extreme right-wing candidate to have an alternative government project. An example of this is the speech of the governor of São Paulo. You can put the next, please. Yeah, here. No? The jargon that unified and mobilized the far right and center no longer has the same impact it had in the 2018 election. Antipetism, let's take Brazil away from the PT, was a phrase highlighted by the governor of São Paulo, but the effect will not be the same as in 2018. The PT is still the party most preferred by voters and has recovered its percentage since 2018. Well, I think I need to end my presentation as I have already run out the time. I don't know, I don't see my time. How was my time? Was okay?
It's about time you finish, I think. You're a little bit past your time already.
Okay.
No problem.
So I only point some aspects for the situation now from the extreme right nowadays, but we don't know what in the next weeks can become.
Okay. Yes. Are you done?
Yes, it's okay.
Thanks a bunch for your presentation. And I think that I'll like to start mine. Let me just change here the slides, right? The presentation itself. That's just mine. So I have to switch. All right, this one here. Okay. Can you guys see it? You can, right?
Yes.
So, yes. So I'm going to present an analysis of survey data that upgrades some of the work I've been doing on Bolsonarism and the profile of Bolsonaro's voters. I mean, there's a debate on the Brazilian academic. It's Brazilian and international in the sense because there are some Brazilianists also who contribute to this debate about what would be, the main factors behind the preference, the electoral preference for Bolsonaro, right? And part of the literature, decided or is dedicated to trying to find these factors by analyzing data coming from opinion surveys. So that's where I am right now. So instead of, there are different approaches to the study of Bolsonarism, right? Which is a general term we use of Bolsonarismo to define this complex of, it depends. Some people understand it as a social movement. Some people describe it as an ideology, and others as a set of political and ideological preferences that condition the vote for Bolsonaro. I prefer the last, actually the last version of it. Instead of supposing that Bolsonarism is a coherent ideology, something that can be described as an ideology, instead of imagining Bolsonarism as a social movement that has its own organization and ways of communicating, I prefer to concentrate on the electoral and the aspect of that, as the political behavior aspect of that. Because I think that, you know, there's a long debate about that, but it's basically because I think that people who do the other versions of the other approaches don't do a good job by doing that. And also because I think that the most important aspect of Bolsonaro and Bolsonarismo is the capacity to win elections and to occupy, you know, political posts like in government. So, and then enact policy and change the lives of people. So I think the extreme right in Brazil becomes more effective, of course, when it wins elections. And I want to know why they win elections when they do and why they lose also. So basically, this work, the central questions that animate this analysis I'm going to present now, it's what's the profile of Bolsonaro's voters today? And, you know, if you take this literature, this body of literature, basically people started studying, you know, the social demographic variables that are present in surveys and see how they correlate to the vote for Bolsonaro. And then they started adding also moral and political attitudes, ideologies, and how those also correlate with the preference for Bolsonaro. So I'm going to actually, you know, take all of that in perspective. So the main hypothesis of my analysis is that moral conservatism is the main predictor, because of course literature has shown over and over again that in the case of Bolsonaro, and actually in the case of many national examples of this electoral and political success of the radical, the populist radical right, moral conservatism is a major factor, right? So there's a consensus in the field about that, at least. So I'm going to test if that applies to Bolsonaro too. And also social demographic factors, because, you know, this goes without saying, right? We always start from social demographic factors and add different variables to it in order to see if they can improve, you know, the explaining power of the models we use. And also I'm going to test another hypothesis that has to do with the anti-PT. PT is the Workers' Party. It's now in power. The party of Lula and Dilma in the past is a center-left party. And there's in the literature also, there are some authors say that the PT, the pro-PT and the anti-PT sentiments organize, you know, the Brazilian party system, at least when you look at it from the perspective of demand, of, you know, how voters relate to parties in Brazil. So they say that, and this is the case more blatantly of Zucco and Samuels, that if you see the history of Brazil New Republic, that is this democratic system and regime that was installed in the 1980s and it's still here, still functioning. that what defines, the party system from the perspective of demand is, a liking for PT that surpasses any other party, and also the dislike for PT. So I'm going to test this hypothesis too. If Bolsonarismo is correlated, if the anti-PT sentiment has a role to play in Bolsonarismo, in the preference for Bolsonaro. So basically, other questions related to it, Bolsonaro. How are we going to discuss Bolsonarismo? Is it an ideological or reactive movement? Which cleavages structure the vote for Bolsonaro? Because, many authors have found that, for example, women, just to, pick up a topic that was actually central to Lena's presentation now. So women vote has like 11-12% less probability for voting Bolsonaro than men. Blacks, they support Bolsonaro much less than white people over here in Brazil. Just to give you some examples of the variables that authors have shown to be relevant to the preference for Bolsonaro. That's why social demographic variables are important to take into consideration, because we have to test if these differences we see in the realm of social demographic variables resist, the addition of other variables like ideological variables, if they are really social demographic or if there's something else they're expressing. So what else? Theoretical implications. Well, it's, this belongs to this wider debate about right-wing populism in Brazil, or right-wing politics in Brazil. I don't like the term populism very much, as a matter of fact. Also, it has to do with this anti-PT sentiment, so I think it's a study of that too. And also explores intersectionality, because we're going to see how different social demographic variables interact in the preference for Bolsonaro, the preference for the populist radical right vote. What else? So my database, the database I'm using here is the survey, The Face of Democracy, A Cara de Democracia, which is done by the Institute of Democracy, which is a huge project that I belonged in the past, because it ended last year, but we continue to do the survey. So we did the survey in October. It's very fresh, very fresh data. And so this is a survey with like 150 questions, I think. 2.5 thousand respondents is a nationally representative sampling, and it was done in October 2025. The dependent variable I'm using here is the vote in the second round of the 2022 election that had Lula pitched against Bolsonaro, and Lula won by a very narrow margin. Okay, so it was Bolsonaro's second presidential election, the first one in 2018. As Silvana has said, he won, and in 2022 he lost. So I'm transforming the variable into a dichotomized variable, basically, right? So vote for Bolsonaro would be 1, and not vote for Bolsonaro 0, right? So what else? What are the techniques I'm using here? Basically, binary logistic regression models, right? With a dependent variable, vote for Bolsonaro. And I'm doing an incremental modeling strategy here. So the first model only takes into consideration social demographic variables, right? The model 2 to 4 add attitudinal dimensions to these social demographic variables. One by one, I'm going to show you what are these dimensions and how are they formed and calculated. And then M5 would be, the model 5 would be the full model, where you have the social demographic variables and all the attitudinal indices. The indices are variables that are made of other variables, okay? of compound. They're compound variables. And then model M5B, which is the final model, it takes not only the social demographic and attitudinal variables, but also the anti-PT sentiment. So the anti-PT sentiment is added at the very end, okay? These are also all variables that come from the survey by recoding the survey data. The matrix I'm using here is like, we're gonna see the matrix. I'm going to explain that. So social demographic variables are education, income, age, religion, race, region in Brazil, which is a very relevant variable when we talk about voting preferences, and sex or gender, if you want. And then there are the attitudinal items, the attitudinal variables that I'm compounding to make these three indexes, right? So the index of moral conservatism combines the variables of same-sex marriage, gay adoption, abortion, imprisonment for abortion, racial quotas, school militarization, and religious education. So all these items, by addition, basically, we created a score that we give, every respondent based on the questions he or she answered regarding these questions, right? There is also an index of punitiveness, which is like how people are prone to support, tough repression of crime, law and order kind of policies. In this case, we took into account, the lowering of the criminal age of responsibility, the death penalty, if people are for. Those are all questions. Are you for or against this and that and this and that? So the questions, enumerate many things, and you have to say for or against. Drugs, for example, is, the legalization of drugs, and guns is also the legalization of gun control or no gun control. And then there's also an index of economic conservatism, privatization, and Bolsa Familia enter here, if people are pro or con. So all the conservative answers were coded as 1, and the progressive as 0, okay? And the anti-PT sentiment is a question that, traditional question also in surveys all over the world and here in Brazil too. They ask people if the respondents, if they can identify, if they have any party of their liking, and then the following questions, so please say which party is that, and then right after that, do you have any party that you particularly dislike, and then what party would that be? So, and then we coded that for the anti-PT sentiment, just so you can have a baseline idea, like 1% declare antipathy toward PT, and 80% basically have no antipathy. And it's interesting to notice that people without anti-PT sentiment, 17% of them voted for Bolsonaro. So they don't have anti-PT sentiment, but even then they voted for Bolsonaro. But the most interesting thing that already anticipates the results of the study is that almost 88% of those who declare to be not have any kind of to reject PT basically voted for Bolsonaro. So there's a huge proportion of people who harbor an anti-PT sentiment and who dislike or who like Bolsonaro, who preferred Bolsonaro to Lula in the second round. So the indices were created by summation and then standardization. So at the end, they go from 0 to 1, okay? So they can be compared. Look, I tested the correlation between the indices in order to see if they're not highly correlated, because in this way it doesn't work well, because you would be considering different things But in fact, if they're highly correlated, they're expressing probably a hidden variable they're not taking into consideration. But the correlations are not very high, which is good. So the multicollinearity is not high. There is some correlation with anti-PT, but it's not high enough to consider that redundant. As if, if there was, it would be basically anti-PT sentiment with another name, but it's not. So the test of model fitness here will take into consideration some metrics, right? So first of all, two versions of what they call pseudo R squared, which is basically the idea of having, to fit a regression to a distribution, but we're not talking about over here of continuous variables, but of discrete variables, of dichotomic variables. So that's why it's called pseudo R. It doesn't use the OLS, the idea of minimizing the squares, the square distance between the proposed correlation curve and the distribution, the points of the distribution. But it's something analog to that, done with dichotomous data. So basically what we have to know is that the McFadden R2, one of the most strict measures to the fit of the model, right, has the following scale. It ranges from 0 to 1, but basically if you have from 0 to 0.1, it's a very weak fit. If you have from 0.1 to 0.2, it's a weak fit. If you have to 0.2 to 0.4, it's an excellent fit. And if you have 0.4 more than 0.4, it's an exceptional fit. So it doesn't have to be close to 1. And the Nagel-Kirk R2, which is another version of fit parameter that it's closer to the actual R2, the OLS. It's more generous in a sense. So if you have from 0 to 0.2, it's a weak fit. If you have 0.2 to 0.4, it's acceptable fit. 0.4 to 0.6, good fit, and above 0.6, excellent fit. And on top of that, I also use the ACAIC information criterion, also known as AIC, which actually balances not only the fit, but the complexity, the number of variables of your model. Because the idea is like the more parsimonious the model is, the better, right? The less number of variables, because of course the variables have to be explained in theoretical terms. So if you add like 100 variables to your model, it's going to be very difficult to explain, try to come up with an explanation in current English or Portuguese of, what's the role of those variables. The ACAIC, the AIC basically works in the following manner. It's relative. So you always compare one model to the other, the AIC of one model to the other. And what you want to do is to lower, instead, the other ones you have to get in order to get a better fit, you have to, get higher to increase your pseudo R square. The AIC, you have to lower it. So the model has to have an AIC smaller than the previous one in order to have a better fit than the previous one. And then the number of points, if you lower just by 2 points, doesn't make any difference. From 2 to 4, slightly better. From 4 to 10, clearly better. And more than 10 is excellent to have this kind of result. And what we had here is, so the first of the social demographic, the first model only has the social demographic variables, right? Age, income, region, religion. As you can see here, I mean, this McFadden and the Nagel-Kirk, it's still a weak fit. So it's not very good to predict vote for Bolsonaro. Not to predict, actually, to explain. The M2 adds social demographic variables to the conservative moral index. already improved, you see? And also the AAC lowered by 25. So this is really good. So this means that adding conservative moral index to the social demographic actually increases the fit quite a bit. As you can see, the Nagel curve here is already to 25. So it's already here to acceptable fit. When you add punitivism to this one here, right? Oh no, this is just punitivism. And this is conservative economics. So they increase, they also, all of them get oh no, I'm sorry. They all increase the quality of the fitness of the model, but antipetismo is amazing. As you can see here, it jumps from the base model, the baseline model of 0.1 to almost 0.3. Adds a lot to the fitness of the model, right? And the model also, drops here almost 500 points in the AIC, which is, 10 was already very good. So 500 points is amazing. And then in order to get an even better model, now, when you take all the indices, the social demographic also variables, but without anti-PT, you see it drops already too. So anti-PT really has a huge, huge effect on the result. And this model here, as a matter of fact, is the best one of them all, because you can have a McFadden R square of 0.33 and a Nagel curve of 0.47. So that would be 0.33, it's excellent fit, and 47 is good fit. So it's more far. This one is slightly better because instead of having the indices, you have the variables separated. So it explains a little bit better, but the number of variables increases by 10. So in order to combine both things, I think it's better to stick to this one because it's more parsimonious. I also tested the multicollinearity of these variables in order to see if they're not highly correlated, because it makes no sense to use variables that are highly correlated in the same regression. You have to decide and either combine them or take one out. And the difference here in the predictors, just the main predictors here, you can see anti-PT sentiment is by far has a very large contribution to the fitness of the model, right? This is the delta of the McFadden R square. So it gained more than 19 points, 19.5 percentile points. Moral conservatism, you see the contribution is already moderate. It's very different from the other there, right? It's 3 times less. Economic conservatism, it has also a small contribution. It's like 5 times less than anti-PT sentiment. And punitiveness, a very marginal contribution, 20 times smaller. So anti-PT together is more important than all the other attitudinal indexes combined, right? It also did an analysis of predictive accuracy, I'm sorry. Because when you do this kind of model fitness, you're trying to explore why did people vote for Bolsonaro? What are the main attitudinal and social demographic variables that explain the vote? When you do predictive accuracy, what you're doing is basically you try to predict who voted for Bolsonaro. Just a sec. Oops, Silvana. And so you're testing your model for the capacity of the model to discriminate between people who voted and people who did not vote for Bolsonaro. The way you test it basically is to create a test from your own sample. It creates a test group and then submits this test group to the model to see if it gets right or not. Again, as you can see, it's called the parameters here are the area under the curve, AUC, and the receiver operating characteristic, ROC, right? It measures how well your vote discriminates between the two groups, people who voted, people who did not vote, as I said. If you have the AUC equals 0.5, it's random because the model doesn't make any difference. It's like you toss the coin and you're asking this person voted or did not vote for Bolsonaro. If you toss a coin, you're gonna get roughly 50% of the results on one side and 50 on the other, right? So when you do the predictive capacity of these models, only the social demographic model already is good for predicting vote. When you add the indices, it becomes even better. When you add anti-PT, excellent, 0.82. And when you get anti-PT indices in social demographic, 87. That means that the model classifies the next voter, next person, almost 90% right. And only the anti-PT variable added 15.6 point improvement over the social demographic model. Here are the metrics, right? Oh, in terms of odd ratios, what else? So a person with an anti-PT sentiment has 14.2 times the odds of voting for Bolsonaro compared to someone without anti-PT sentiment, holding all other factors constant. Anti-PT sentiment increases the probability of voting for Bolsonaro approximately 50 percentage points. From 20, that's the general probability of voting for Bolsonaro of the whole sample, to 80 when you restrict to people who have anti-PT sentiment. So roughly transforming 1 in 5 chance to 4 in 5. So if in the general population of respondents, you had a proportion of 1 person who voted to 5. If you select only people who have anti-PT sentiment, that goes to 4 in 5. Moral conservatism increases the probability of voting for Bolsonaro by approximately 40 to 45 percentage points. That's a lot too. Economic conservatism, 20 to 25 percentage points. So an economic conservative has about 45 probability of vote for 45% probability of voting for Bolsonaro compared to 25 for an economic progressive, right? Other factors equal, always other factors equal, right? So here, I'm also taking into consideration the social demographics variables, who have a lesser effect also in the predictive capacity of the model. So if the person is evangelical or not, right, it increases from 30 to 45% the capacity, the probability of voting for Bolsonaro. If the person is Black, it decreases from 40 to 28. So being Black has a protective effect. It's a protective barrier for voting for Bolsonaro. Brown is not significant statistically. Indigenous, not significant. And female sex, in other words, the idea that women tend not to vote for Bolsonaro much more than men actually dissolves when you add these other characteristics. Okay? So sex alone doesn't explain the vote for Bolsonaro, only when combined to other categories, particularly with antipetismo and moral conservatism. So this is the odds ratios, basically, with this logarithm scales. As you can see, the ones that cross the line in red, which is 1, right? Odds ratios are, the one is the 50%. It's not, has no effect. So all these ones that cross the one line do not have statistical significance. So you should consider only religion. It does have an effect, moderate effect. Since the scale is logarithmic, you should, take into consideration that it grows a lot as you go farther away from the center. And the attitudes, economic conservatism, moral conservatism, and anti-Pietism. Okay? I just just for the sake of playing with proportions. So if you have a typical Bolsonarista, so conservative, white, evangelical, conservative, rich, and anti-PT, the probability of this person voting for Bolsonaro is 99%. If you have a person who's black and evangelical, and is a conservative in terms of morals, and also anti-PT, it's almost 92%. So, to be black has an effect, but it doesn't, it's not enough to counteract being conservative in moral terms and being anti-PT. Another, a businessman from São Paulo and also anti-PT, 85%. Another person, white and moderate, without anti-PT, drops to 20%. It's close to the average. Urban progressive, without anti-PT, 10%. And the typical anti-Bolsonarista, which would be a black woman, young, from the Northeast and progressive, 0.4%. So what our main findings is that anti-PT sentiment is dominant, is the dominant predictor. Moral conservative is secondary, and punitiveness is not significant. So if other works have shown that, have implied that this law and order preference, that law and order preferences characterize Bolsonaro, the vote for Bolsonaro, the preference for Bolsonaro, this study shows that it doesn't. It doesn't explain. And race remains significant, even when you add anti-PT, right? So it does challenge other previous interpretations that reduce Bolsonarism to moral conservatism, right? It does challenges the interpretation that Bolsonarism is, its main characteristic is punitive authoritarianism, and also challenges interpretation that social identities are deterministic in the preference for Bolsonaro. There are key factors because, anti-PT sentiment can overcome even the strongest of social identities, as we've shown for the case of blacks. So the new synthesis is Bolsonarism is PT rejection, cultural conservatism, and economic liberalism. What else? I think that's about it. I just wanted to say that I intend to actually test this analysis with the data coming from the survey of 2018 that we have, was electoral year, or 2017 maybe. No, it has to be 2018, because in 2017 there was no Bolsonaro. And in order to see what changed over the years. I also have to think about, causation in a more detailed way, because I haven't explored that. Qualitative studies in order to see and also have an insight on causation. I'm already doing, we have a continuous, an ongoing qualitative project that studies Bolsonaro voters, Lula voters, and all the ideological spectrum in Brazil. And that's about it. I'm done. Thank you. So
thank you. Wow, that was very, very interesting. Yeah. Do we have some questions already? Otherwise, I would have some comments.
let me see here. Let me see. What strange. Oh, the comments were not activated. Let me see here, just a second.
We have a cyclone here in Porto Alegre now, emergency situation.
Oh, really?
Really, yes. It's all black here.
Oh my God.
Without energy,
Electricity.
sometimes, electricity, yes.
Por que ele pediu isso? Pode falar para mim. Tinha alguém falando, trolando, né? Mas a gente estava dependendo dos comentários da plateia, não pode ativar mais. Devia ter perguntado para mim, ele, né? Tudo bem. Guys, there was a technical problem. We won't be getting comments from.
Okay. So I'm having one. I think but it's very interesting, the exchange. I think we have some similarities, but a lot of differences, I would say, which is interesting. Of course, the institutional setting is completely different with the presidential system and also the personalistic aspect, which is much more important in a presidential system like Brazil than in the parliamentary systems in European. What is also very interesting is, although moral conservatism does play a role in both aspects, I would say, and we heard the women gender aspect as part of the moral conservatism, which is maybe we have to dig deeper a little bit in that, in looking for the question of women. But what is interesting is that religion does play absolutely no role in Germany, at least, and also in most of the Western European countries. It doesn't play any role anymore. Maybe in East Germany it's a little bit different. Like Poland and Hungary, they use Catholic religion very much as an aspect. But what is most interesting for me is that the anti-PT, which is very striking as an explanatory factor, and I would say of course, I would ask why anti-PT is so strong, so important. But I would have a similar aspect, which is very crucial for the rise of the far right in Western Europe, or in Europe at all, but especially in Western Europe, which is anti-immigration. So we have different foci, different topics, but the anti position is very important, which leads to something we haven't mentioned at all, but this is a rising polarization, I would say, that you completely disagree with a certain aspect. You completely disagree with PT, and therefore you tend to vote for Bolsonarismo. You completely disagree with immigration, and therefore you vote for the AfD, which is something we have found in several surveys, and that this is the most important aspect. And even people who, in focus group discussions, I mentioned that already, Joao, in the private discussion, who mentioned in focus group discussions that they do not agree with other aspects of AfD. In the end, they say, but I'm against immigration and therefore I vote for AfD, which is a similarity with the anti-PT, something which is so strong you completely disagree with something which leads for voting to this party, although you do not really agree to several other aspects of the party program. So this is number one, the anti-stance, and moral conservatism is maybe a second aspect. Yeah, law and order is mentioned in programs, I think on both sides, but does it really matter? It matters in Germany as long as it mentioned, is it because it is linked to immigration again, but not at all to insecurity and crime. This is some interesting aspects we should keep in mind when we talk further about the Probral project.
Yeah, this is a very good point, I think, Wolfgang, because it seems to me that you pointing to a heterogeneity between the two cases that might have a structural, I would say, common cause, which is like not a cause, but a mechanism maybe, which is like this threshold topics, right? Because as you see in this analysis, anti-PT sentiment is really dominant, right? So maybe in the case of Germany, and that's probably the case, you have another topic that is dominant, which is immigration. And I think you're right in your comment to say that, you know, these topics are the ones that lead people from one choice to the other. It's just, you know, if you pass that topic, as you said, I mean, if you choose that topic, that's so strong that it will condition your electoral choice almost alone, or have a huge effect on it. It doesn't have to be the same, right?
Yeah, it doesn't has to be the same, and especially it's so strong that it's you're not willing. Well, in the case of PT, it's difficult to compromise or find some solution. But you're either, it's the idea of this is the enemy. You're either against or you're in favor of my side. You're either against PT or you're either against immigration or you're an enemy. If you're in favor of immigration or we are in favor of PT, you're an enemy, which, as I said, increases the polarization, I think, which is an aspect we should keep in mind. And this leads then to voting for one special party who really proposes the solution. The question is, I do understand why, or we know from surveys, from studies, because we have a high immigration, and these immigrants are seen as competitors on the job market. They are related to crime and insecurity. They are related to, sometimes they are even related again to health issues. They rape women, and all these aspects are related to immigrants, and they are costly, etc. So these are the reasons why people are against immigration. And also we have this ethno-nationalist idea that they are violating the racial pluralism and things like that. So we have different answers why against immigration. I would really be interested why these people are so strong against PT. Because from our point of view, this is a rather moderate social democratic party, and not really the communist revolutionary party. Maybe it used to be in the beginning.
So, can I say something, John?
Sure, please.
So I think it's the strength of anti-PT sentiment within Bolsonarism, of course, demonstrate that the PT organizes and unifies the far-right electoral market. There is no doubt, I have no doubt that the PT has an outlier organizational trajectory in Brazil. However, João, given the personalistic nature of Brazilian culture, it would be important to assess whether this sentiment is associated with the PT, the party, or with Lula. Because anti-Lula sometimes is strength in the voter from Bolsonaro as anti-PT. The Brazilian culture don't like parties. If you think this sentiment is anti-PT, is the strength in the Bolsonarismo, we need to see if this is against the party, against the values of the party, against the values, or it is a personalistic sentiment about Lula, because the figure of Lula is very strong in the party, and the Lulismo is very strong. I don't know if the Lulismo is no stronger of the party sentiment, anti-PT sentiment as a party.
Yeah, can I comment on that? Yeah, I think it's a good idea, Silvana, to actually run the model for anti-Lula and compare it to anti-PT and see. And we will be answering this question, if, who is more important, the party identification or the personalistic, charisma of Lula, right? Yeah. But in the end, it boils down to something very similar. I don't know the results, but yeah.
Yes. Yeah, because we think the anti-Getulismo. Anti-Getulio was very strong.
Exactly.
It's the same dynamic. It's the same anti-Getulio. I don't know. It's a very interesting things to see.
Yeah, no, it is. I really agree. It's very good comment. By the way, Wolfgang, have you thought about comparing the different states in Germany and how the vote for the AfD varies from state to state, and also because I think it's a very interesting laboratory, right? You have different states and regions, and you have different intensities of preferences for AfD, and probably different reasons why people vote or do not vote for AfD in these regions, states.
Yeah, actually, we tried that in an article, but the data was not significant enough, because we have usually national surveys or we have state surveys. In national surveys, if they are representative, you do not have a clear, as I said, dissemination of respondents. So we simply did not have enough people from the different states in the surveys so far. So in the state surveys, the questions are not the same. So this should be, it's a problem of missing data, I would say. But the question arises if in West Germany, the people have the same motivations, and some surveys indicate, yeah, also immigration is an important topic for the voters, but not, in some regions it may be also, as you know, the two big explanations, the cultural explanation and the globalization losers explanation. And in some areas, globalization losers might also be relevant in Western Germany, especially because the very remote areas, the AfD is stronger, while in East Germany, it's more in the successful areas like Saxony and Thuringia, where the AfD is more successful, and they are economically quite successful in these regions. But this changes also a little bit over time, when they can win new voters, and they gain also new topics, more and more attracting workers who also fear in general the being losers of globalization. So the problem is that this is evolving and this is dynamic. So the studies we had 5 or 6, 7 years ago are not really relevant anymore. So this is an ongoing moving target we have to study. But we are trying to focus on these differences between East and West. And also we have some, as I said, some indicators that it's in different regions, but it's more a qualitative assumption, because the data are not really very good on the regional, on the state level to study this
I see. I have a comment for Lena. Can I make it? Lena,
Sure.
how is this? You know, I heard from Wolfgang also when I was in Germany, in Rostock, and also from other sources that's become a trend more recently in the European radical right or populist radical right to mitigate the conservative stance on gender, particularly on women, because they're starting to use that against Muslims. So if immigration is this huge, is the defining maybe the most important element of their agenda, it seems to me that according to these interpretations, it might become useful for them to pose as being kind of progressive or at least more egalitarian towards women, because in this way they can accuse Muslims for being anti-women.
Yeah.
So how do you do that?
Gender is always like you saw in my presentation. So gender combines like core elements. So nativism, authority. So also the whole narrative about Muslims, and this is also connecting the whole refugee topic that was very publicly discussed in Germany since 2015. It's an ongoing topic, and so gender correlates very much with this question, and what for example, the AfD does is it's just like you said, it uses the white women, for instance, in positions of victims. So and the AfD, there are female leaders, von Storch, Petri, Weidel, etc., that are kind of embody the endangered white woman who is can't go outside at night or in the evening because they are immigrants, they are refugees, they're Muslim men, etc. They're gonna get raped, and they kind of embody this victim mentality of the poor white woman. She needs protection, and so that kind of confirms their positions on anti-immigrations and deportation. So they have to these criminals they have to leave, and on top of that, they also use this as to showcase women have the same rights as men, like here's the female leader, and women have freedom, and we can't let these refugees, we can't let these immigrants endanger our women and their rights, and have this patriarchal order, this narrative from the Muslim community transfer to the white community. So yeah, gender is highly combined with these topics.
And I would add, the mitigating role you're talking of is not taking place in Germany. I would say that this is not the argument of the AfD, and I would say it's also not, for example, in Austria, where the most radical far-right parties at the moment in Western Europe. The mitigation takes place, for example, in France, where the Rassemblement National has adopted women's rights positions. It takes also place in Scandinavia, I would say. And I think the fact is the intervening variable that in these countries, in Scandinavia, but also in France, women's rights are much more developed than in Germany. Caveat, Lena mentioned in East Germany, we had also very highly developed women's rights, and here we have a completely cultural backlash. But in Scandinavia, you can't win a pot in elections if you would argue against women's rights, and that's why also the far right is quite progressive in this respect. No one would deny women's rights to work in Scandinavia or also in France, and no one would deny, I would say also in the Netherlands and Belgium here. These countries are a little bit more progressive. I do not know exactly in Italy, I have to admit. This is something I do not know the position there. But in Germany, the far right or the AfD is on this side much more socially conservative concerning their, like let's say Poland or also Hungary. This resembles more the Eastern European style, where after communism, which promoted women's rights, it completely was crashing down a little bit in communist states. I have the impression, but I can't prove it. Basically, I know from Scandinavia, where we had where we did some studies that Scandinavian far-right parties are much more in favor of women's rights, because this is a social consensus, and they wouldn't argue against it. No. You're muted, I think.
Oh, right now in Brazil, there is a debate about this because Bolsonaro is in jail, right? And his wife is talking about presenting herself as a candidate for president next year. And there's actually it's a double debate within the party in Bolsonarismo, because she has to get the blessing from Bolsonaro, since it's a movement. In the sense, there is, you can talk about a movement because it's much more than a party. The party doesn't make much of a difference. Bolsonaro actually, he commands, but she has to get approval from him. And he's very chauvinistic, so and it's really hard for her to get this approval, I think, because he has like 4 sons, and 4 of them are politicians right now. So they probably are gonna get the support of Bolsonaro and not her. And also, but there is also another contradiction, because she herself is a kind of evangelical pastor, and part of her preaching is for the traditional role of women. You see the paradox? So she always used to say that women are there to serve their husbands, that they are only a complement to the men's role in society, and blah blah blah. So they always have this kind of marginal role, and now she has to put herself in the leading role in order to be the candidate for president. So it's kind of interesting to see this drama unfold.
Yeah, so there are, as I said, there are some factors which are similar, or we can see similarities within differences, and many things are quite different. Like, as I said, for example, religion, which you mentioned now, that she's an evangelical pastor. So, and religion is absolutely a non-political factor anymore in Western Europe, and apart from Poland and Hungary, I would say also in Eastern Europe, but in Hungary it's more a strategy of Viktor Orban misusing Catholicism as let's say the myth for national unity, while in Poland it's really Catholicism in Poland has ever been a great factor, and this is also today. But in the rest of Europe, we have really a declining importance of religion, which is interesting to see. So, that it's not used also in politics anymore. On the other hand, we have the influence of the traditional, as I mentioned, especially in the Catholic regions in Germany. That's where the AfD is the weakest, which has been historically also with the NSDAP, with the Nazi party, because in the Catholic regions we still have a vibrant civil society, and the churches argue in Germany against the AfD. That's their official position. So this influences somehow, but it's not really very important, I think, for voting choice and for voters anymore.
As you said that, I was, this thought, got to my mind. I mean, you have a strong anti-Muslim sentiment. Isn't this a strong anti-Muslim sentiment played by some sort of a Christian identity?
No, not in Western Europe. Actually, contrary, the churches, or let's say not in Germany, and I think not in Western Europe, the anti-Muslim sentiment I can see in Poland, in Hungary, where it's used to, we have our national identity defined as Polish and Catholic, or Hungarian and Catholic, and there it's used also. And also the church in Hungary, I think, is, and some part of the church in Poland are on this side. In Germany, not, and also in most Western European countries, the position of the church is we are humanitarian. We help the refugees, that's our duty. And so there, and in Germany, the churches are really on the humanitarian side against the AfD.
Yeah.
And they say we even have to help Muslims if they come as refugees.
Lucky you. I feel like I'm in the Middle Ages. We're in the Middle Ages here with all this God talk. But
well, luckily, as I mentioned once, evangelicals do not play any important role in Germany.
Yes,
and
but Wolfgang, but in Germany, in the regions from the DDR, the feeling of the memory of religious repression don't mobilize religious identity in another way, but
no, I don't think so.
Because an important rule about the opposition in the DDR was the evangelical Protestants.
Yeah, but not evangelicals. Protestants, yes, but
yeah,
Lutherans.
not neo-Pentecostal, but
That's very important. In Germany, evangelicals, Pentecostals, they are very strange sectarian movements.
Yes,
And Protestants are quite liberal in Germany, and also the Catholics nowadays in Germany are quite liberal compared to 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
So this is highly, in West Germany, I would say there's a kind of secularization, while in East Germany, there's a kind of, the people are not religious anymore. And so also the basic religious values are lost, which is more or less relevant for Western Germany, which means the basic religious values like love thy neighbor and be good. Something like that, which helps also not
community
against immigrants at first sight. So the churches always say the true Christian does not discriminate against refugees and immigrants, but helps them. So this is the official position, and this is kind of a basic sentiment, I would say, within many people. Who are still somehow Christian, but this plays absolutely no role anymore in East Germany. But we, because religion is not existent, majority is not part of churches anymore, and also has no affiliation to any religion anymore. As I said, I think Lena, how many? I think 3/4 of population here in our state has no religious affiliation anymore. I would have to look it up for the whole East Germany, but it's a majority. It's a clear majority having no religious affiliation anymore. So, as I said, this is not the same in every European country. So we have a lot of differences also, but yeah.
Good. Any other
good.
questions?
It's good. We are done. We do not grab anymore, right?
We do not want
The video, grabbing the video, making the video for YouTube. It's done, or is it still working?
Still running.
Still running. Okay.
Everything
It's
is
now
going to the.
So maybe we should end it now. It's more than 2 hours.
We should wrap it.
Yeah.
Sure. Ana, você poderia terminar, querida? Obrigado. Let me see if we really. Let me check there. I was following also.
So Lena, you could also get the video link to